All right, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome. Today is Monday, January 11th, 2016, and this is Admissions Live. I'm your host, Chris Dorso, and every year the Admissions Live season, if you will, kicks off as we start my third year now as host of Admissions Live. We start off with an episode about the state of college admissions. There's so much that goes on in our world, and we try to cover everything we can possibly cover in 45 minutes. Challenge accepted. And with us this year, once again, is a leading voice in higher education, Scott Jaschik, who is editor at Inside Higher Ed and provider of Inside Higher Ed magnetic poetry, which resides on my door. And so we're going to look at, trends, 2016 trends, and look at the most important issues from the years past, how they impact things in the future. But first, a quick shout out to all of the sponsors who make everything that we do possible. Admissions Live, of course, part of the Higher Ed Live network. We are a series of web shows that offer direct access to the best and brightest minds in education. Live webcasts like this one allow viewers to share knowledge and participate in discussions around the most important issues in the industry. All of our episodes are free and available on the internet, both in video form at higheredlive.com, as well as in podcast form on iTunes. So you can watch this anytime. You may not be live right now. Today's live broadcast is made possible by Chegg. Chegg Enrollment Services connects the nearly 80% of college-bound students researching schools across the web with the colleges and universities who are trying to reach them. Using an online platform that includes 10 of the most popular college search sites online, Chegg can help you save 90% on the cost of traditional methods for generating your inquiry pool. So you can email outreach@chegg.com, CHEGG.com, schedule a free consultation. Higher Ed Live is also produced by M. Stoner, a marketing and communications firm that works with education institutions on branding, strategy, web design, and more. In higher ed, the degree is the product, and your program pages are some of the most marketing critical on your campus. We spend a lot of time worrying about the homepage. We spend a lot of time worrying about the admissions page, but there are so many other pages out there that are program specific that are so very, very important. And if you are interested in getting M. Stoner's model to building effective program pages and spending some quality time with one of their experts, we have just tweeted out a link at Higher Ed Live, and you can see and talk with one of our friends at M. Stoner. So with that, let's get cracking. Scott Jaschik is one of the three founders of Inside Higher Ed. He leads the editorial operations of Inside Higher Ed with his colleague Doug Lederman, overseeing news content, opinion pieces, career advice, blogs, and other features. Scott is a leading voice on higher education issues, quoted regularly in publications nationwide, publishing articles on colleges and publications such as the New York Times, the Boston Globe, Washington Post, and any number of other places. Scott served as a mentor in the Community College Fellowship of the Heckinger Institute on Education and the Media, Teachers College of Columbia University, member of the Board of the Education Writers Association, and from 1999 to 2003, Scott was the editor of the Chronicle of Higher Education. So his pedigree is strong, I promise you. Scott grew up in Rochester, New York, graduated from Cornell in 1985, currently lives in Washington, and welcome, Scott, to the show.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Cool. So for those of you who are watching along live, do please tweet us the Higher Ed Live hashtag. You can tweet me right there, or you can tweet us at Higher Ed Live, and we will do our best to answer any questions that you have and share any comments that you have as we go along. This is always a really interesting show, and we want to make sure that we get lots of great discussion going. So please feel free to ask us. So first question I've got to ask is, one of the big things that is always a concern in higher ed, particularly on the enrollment end. We had a meeting this morning. It's funny, we had a meeting with our advising center talking about transfer credits and how they do advising. And they talked about how they have an army of 12 grad students who work for them and do all of that. And like, we fight for 2. Because we can't afford to have more than 2 grad students. And so finances are very much a hot button issue, both on the micro level as well as on the macro level. And so what is the financial outlook for colleges and universities in 2016?
Well, as it would relate to admissions,
right.
Most important thing to think about, I think, is that every college has its own financial struggles. And I'll oversimplify here by looking at a few groups. So let's start with the publics. In the publics, there are some states that are having relatively good years. California, after getting really hit terribly during the recession, is putting more money into higher ed. And so there are states that are seemingly more healthy than they've been. In many cases, they still aren't back to where they were in 2008, but at least the trend lines are in the right direction. Other states are making cuts, but I guess generally with state higher education, finance, and then admissions, there are a lot of places that don't have enough spots for the students who want to enroll. And so particularly in fast growing states, you've got a lot of colleges and universities that are looking at how do we fill the demand. Now on the private side, you've got the very elite privates that are super wealthy and that are also super competitive in admissions. But there are an awful lot of privates that are not like sorting among the tens of thousands of applicants, but that are much more focused on attracting students. And so if you are in enrollment management at a small private without $1 billion endowment, you've got your work cut out for you because you are pushing to get applicants who are willing to pay, get applicants who can do the work, and it's very challenging right now.
So how do we combat that? Because I mean, it feels like we've been talking about, we'll just get more applicants, and I feel like that's been something that we've been dealing with forever. And how do we break that? How do we break the competition of what this is? I'm a member of a number of Facebook, higher ed admissions groups and things, and there was a counselor who posted yesterday, it was over the weekend, she posted that one of two of her students, a set of twins, were applying to 45 colleges. And it's like, how in 2016 are we still doing this? This is not sustainable.
So, well, that's crazy. And I'll say part of the responsibility is actually my field, the press.
Right.
The press suggests that you can't get into college because it's so difficult to get into Stanford and Harvard or whatever. And I think the reporters need to sort of calm down about that. The reality is most colleges and universities are not highly competitive in admissions. And the reality is there are very, very few students who can't get in anywhere. And those students, I think, were the victims of poor advice. And so I do think that people need to start telling applicants and their parents, who I think cause many of the problems, to chill out a bit. And that if you are picking your potential colleges well, have some reach places, have some you're likely to get into places, and have the safety school or two, even though I know everyone hates that term.
Right.
There is no need to apply to 45 colleges. That's just crazy. The other thing, though, is colleges encourage this. I think colleges want their applicants up so they look good in their ratio of acceptances and that they look like they're more competitive than perhaps they are. And colleges are also caught in this really unhealthy financial situation where they are discounting heavily to students who may not even need the money to enroll. And so they're trying to outbid other colleges. I think this results in some students paying actually less than they should to go to college and an unsustainable financial model for some colleges.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the thing. It's so dangerously unsustainable, and I think we're starting to see that bubble when you look at, a school like we were talking before the show started about Sweetbriar, which was probably the biggest news breaker this year in terms of a school that finally said, "Hey, look, we can't do this anymore. I'm sorry, we've got to close." And they've saved that, and it looks like they're staying open. They've canceled the closing, but they can't be alone in that. And there are certainly other schools that have got to be in that same situation. And I've got to figure it's, as you said, it's those small liberal art colleges that don't have that $1 billion endowment, which is probably 98% of the colleges out there, because we're not all Harvard and Yale and Cornell. We need to make sure that we're continuing to support the breadth of higher education from an enrollment perspective, and understanding that it's not necessarily always about more. And yes, you're right, we're as guilty of that as any. We were talking in the office here as we got our latest round of application numbers. We were up this ungodly percentage of applications, and we're joking about like, oh, we're going to shoot for 40,000 applications. We don't need 40,000 applications to fill a class of 2,700. We just don't. And we're on the state side, so you know it's you know, as we said, there's different factors that go into that as well. I don't know.
And I really worry about colleges that are using discounting to effectively bribe students. I think, you know, when you think about the small privates, the large publics, famous, not famous, I see so many colleges and universities that in fact have a great story to tell about the quality of education, about the niche that they occupy. And I think just going for, we're going to give you a discount, we're going to pretend that you're the greatest scholar in the world, is not a sustainable system. I worry the most about colleges that do not have a clear niche. I think institutions that know what they're about and can promote a vision for education, they're the ones that are going to be best off. And I do think we're going to see more places not necessarily do what Sweetbriar did, but places that have rising discount rates, falling yield rates. That's not a healthy combination, and Sweetbriar was not the only institution like that.
Right. But now the question becomes, because so much of what we do, and we've had the discussion on this show before, is, you know, there's obviously the micro level of the one-on-one, the interaction with students and the parents. But so much of what we do at the macro level is building on previous years' yield numbers and previous years' application numbers and building that freshman class in a way that makes sense. How do we as institutions try to plan if, you know, we're trying, how do we break the old model and still plan for the future in a way that kind of makes sense and quite frankly saves our jobs? Because it was, I remember when I first started in the enrollment world, I was at a small public college, and we were trying very hard to increase the selectivity of our freshman class, and that's hard to do when you're starting from what was basically open enrollment to all of a sudden now you're building that, you know, trying to build in that selectivity that was never there before. And as a 25-year-old, you know, first-time counselor, I said, well, you know what we need to do? We need to just admit a freshman class of just 100 students and just really, you know, make sure that they have that great experience. And our VP was like, are you insane? Like, do you know what will happen if we bring in a freshman class of only 100 students? I was like, yeah, but they're going to have this great experience. It's going to be fantastic. Isn't that the way it works? And so, you know, there's this sort of pie in the sky, you know, best case scenario that we have where everybody fits in a place where there is that vision and there is that niche. And it's hard to do that big picture when you're still trying to look little picture day to day. Okay, yeah, we've got this freshman class coming in this fall, and we've got to make sure that we hit that number, because yes, 2,700 here at Stony Brook is a big freshman class, but we can't do 28, we can't do 2,900, we can't do 3,000 either. And so, you know, we've got to be really careful about how we admit students and making sure that we're where we need to be as an institution.
Well, I'd say I wish colleges would focus more on those who enroll as opposed to those who apply. If you're a college and you're finding you aren't able to admit enough students who can benefit from the education you provide, who make your college financially sustainable, who are likely to enroll, well then, yes, maybe you do have a problem for which you need more applicants. But the question isn't, did you increase your applicant pool by 10%? The question is, do you have a great class? And if you have a great class that is consistent with the educational opportunities and mission of your institution, if it's diverse in the ways that you want it to be diverse, if it is, if they are students who seem to then thrive and stay and do well, I would focus a little more on that and less on the number of applicants. Now, again, if everyone's transferring after 1 year, well, that suggests a problem, and maybe you need to keep applying and get more people. But I am amazed by the institutions who seem to feel pressure to increase the applicant pool for the sake of increasing the applicant pool. And I'm not sure that's healthy.
No, I totally agree. And that's where I think the shift over the last 10, 12, 15 years from an admissions model to an enrollment management model, where you're looking at it from a retention perspective. And it's not just about, okay, let's ram the class in here and then turn our heads to the next class and see what happens. You really need to be thoughtful about how you build that class in a way that really makes sense for your institutional goals. And so, it's certainly, even at the large level, it's something that we struggle with, because we have a large science and engineering program, and there are limits to how many students you can stick in an engineering lab. And so, we really need to be careful about how we do that in the context of everything else that we do. And so it's making sure that those students are getting the right experience so that they're persisting. We get the question a lot on the social media end about, like, oh, the schools want us to take an extra year so that they can get an extra year tuition out of us. No, that doesn't necessarily benefit anyone. we want to bring you in, yes, but we want to get you out. We want you to graduate and go and be successful. And so we want to get you through here in 4 years, and we want to make sure that we can get you through here in 4 years. There are always really interesting discussions that we have with incoming students. I had a discussion last week with an incoming transfer who was concerned about coming from an art school to change to a science major here, and how that would impact, am I going to graduate on time? Unfortunately, no. And, that's the question of, is this the right fit for what you want to do? Are we that niche? Are we that fit school for what your plans may be? So,
well, and as it relates to concerns about debt and tuition, the single best thing you can do as a student to minimize debt is to graduate on time. You're wealthy or poor, borrowing a little or a lot. And things like, now, part of going to college for many students is discovering new things and interests. And so I don't mean to suggest that transferring is inherently bad, or changing programs, rather,
right,
is inherently bad. But I do think it points to the importance of academic advising, such that students are on a track where they're making the right choices so that they can get out on time, because it's that fifth year, that sixth year of tuition slash debt that for many students turns a manageable amount of debt into an unmanageable amount of debt. And, I think actually one of the issues that worries me is that I think too many high school freshmen, having read the horror stories about debt, are saying, I won't take on any debt. And I think that can deprive them of a lot of great educational opportunities. But colleges need to make sure that this year's high school seniors are hearing from college students who feel that their debt is manageable and hasn't taken away their life options.
Right. And, and there's the thinking that some amount of debt is okay, because, in order to get what you want out of your educational experience, you may have to incur some costs in that, and that's all right. And we'll talk about Utica College in a second, but we had Jeff Gates from Utica on the show 2 months ago, and we talked about, because Utica, the big news for them this year was that they cut tuition. Nobody ever cuts tuition. Tuition always goes up, but they cut tuition 40-some%. And, I asked him, I said, how do you realistically, maintain what you've got when there's less money, really less money coming in, especially at a tuition-driven school. Not that we're not all tuition-driven schools these days in 2016, public or private, but to make sure that the students who you are enrolling are there so that they're getting, I'm trying to figure out how to phrase what I'm trying to say, so that they're not applying just, oh, they cut tuition, I need to apply to Utica, but Utica College has the experience that I want to have, and is going to give me the opportunities that I want to have, and even still with the cut, they're still looking at $30,000-$40,000 a year, and I should know the number off the top of my head because we just talked about it and I don't, and so you're still talking about a lot of money, and so that thought of that some amount of debt is not necessarily the end of the world, as long as you said, there is that plan, that long-term plan as to where you're going to go with it.
So I don't know the specifics of the Utica College cut, But I'll tell you that generally I have been dubious of the colleges that do this. And the reason is that almost always when I have looked into it or have had reporters look into it, it turns out to be a college where no one was paying full freight anyway. And discount rates were such that no one was paying anywhere close to the sticker price.
Right. So that was they haven't actually cut tuition at all. That was the answer.
And that's been the case at a number of places that we've looked at. Again, I haven't gone deep into Utica, but now there's still an argument for that in that sticker price can scare people off. But I would say the bigger problem is sticker price having become sort of meaningless. If people just sort of look at, a lot of people who are in admissions and financial aid hate the way many parents treat a college choice like buying a used car and are bargaining and so forth. Well, when colleges suggest that their prices are just an opening negotiation, I think colleges encourage that. And when colleges say they're cutting tuition when in fact no one was paying that, price, I'm not sure it's a really good thing. Again, I could say to you, I am cutting my podcast appearance rate by 100%.
Right.
but I don't have a podcast appearance rate. Right. So you're not really getting a good deal, at least not on price. Right. And I think colleges encourage a lot of cynicism with these sorts of moves.
Good point. All right, so let's shift from the financial aspects to the SAT. The SAT is changing again for 2016. What should we expect besides complete confusion on everybody's count? With the joke here for the last several months is that I want us to just go test optional. So outside of the, so with the changes, what do you see from a standardized testing perspective from the SAT, the new SAT, ACT? What are we going to see in the next couple of years?
So one, I think we're going to see more test optional. We have seen a lot of colleges go test optional during this period after the College Board announced they were revising the SAT and before they actually introduced it. Historically, that's been a period when people sort of wait and see, right. But we're seeing places continue to go test optional. Now, it is also true that many of those places continue to use and look at SAT and ACT scores for those, typically a majority, who submit them. To me, the big questions about the new SAT, look, anytime you do something huge and new, my guess is there are going to be some glitches and there's going to be a lot of confusion. But when that dies down, my biggest question is going to be on the writing test. The current version of the SAT, when it was introduced, its big, significant new thing was the writing test. Right. And I would say by and large, that has not been a huge success. A lot of colleges and universities ignore it. A lot of writing instructors mock it. They say it encourages bad writing. It has definitely not caught on as a good judge of writing. Now, the announced revisions in the SAT seem to respond very much to the critiques that have been made of the current writing test. Now, and so most people I've talked to, including critics of the current writing test, have said the College Board is moving definitively in the right direction. The question is going to be, is it far enough? Do we see more colleges say, you know what, I like this and I'm going to start paying attention to it? Right. Or do we see more colleges saying, I'm going to continue to ignore it? I think that is going to be, at least to me, the biggest thing I'm going to be looking for. Then the other thing, and this relates to test optional, and another topic I know you want to talk about, is what happens on affirmative action. If the Supreme Court bans or limits colleges from considering race and ethnicity, I think we're going to see a lot more test optional colleges. The reality is that on average, Asian and white students do significantly better than Black and Latino students. If you're a college and you want to consider test scores and you can't consider race and ethnicity, you're going to have trouble getting the level of diversity that many institutions want. And so I think that if the Supreme Court takes a critical look at affirmative action, that is quite possibly what's going to happen. And then really the question for the SAT and the ACT will be how to deal with that issue.
Right. So since you brought it up, but yeah, I think it's another thing that we need to sort of talk about. So the Fisher versus Texas and the Supreme Court and all that, where do you see that going this year?
Well, my personal hope is that we go to resolution.
Right. At least, yes.
A long time.
Yeah.
And I keep on thinking it's going to be resolved. But more seriously, I think the odds do not favor affirmative action.
Really?
Justice Kagan has recused herself.
Yeah, that's a good point.
I see only 3 reliable votes for allowing colleges to continue to consider race and ethnicity. Now, they would only need 1 more because a tie would favor the University of Texas's position. But if you look at the remaining 5, while it's always dangerous to predict what people will do, all have expressed great skepticism about any consideration of race. And so again, I'm not saying what I think they should do, but what I think they're likely to do. And so to me, the question is not will they limit affirmative action, but how much they will do so. And I think there's a chance for a sweeping ruling. There's a chance for a more narrow ruling. And this is going to be a huge deal in admissions. It is true, of course, that only the top tier of admissions is race and ethnicity a decisive factor for some students. Most colleges and universities aren't that competitive. But if you look in the non-competitive admissions colleges, so many of them have, summer programs for women in STEM, summer programs for minorities in STEM, special financial aid packages for minority students. All of these things would be affected as well. So if there is a ban on consideration of race, I think it will have a huge impact, in part on what I mentioned on standardized testing, but also what other criteria colleges may add. There are a lot of people who say that colleges need to pay more consideration, for instance, to socioeconomic class, which is totally legal, and I can't imagine the Supreme Court would touch that, to first-generation status.
Right.
So I think you're going to see colleges spending more time, veterans, community college transfers. There are lots of ways beyond consideration of race. And actually, that last one I should mention, community college transfers. I think they are an underutilized way to diversify higher education, although they have a huge impact where colleges do this. Community colleges are generally open admissions. They are generally more diverse than our 4-year institutions, certainly competitive 4-year institutions. And while everyone in theory has a transfer policy, there are colleges that take it seriously and colleges that don't. One way, certainly, that colleges can get a steady supply of diverse juniors and seniors is to have vibrant community college transfer programs.
Yeah, that real sort of pipeline kind of a program can be really, really beneficial. It's funny, you talk about the transfer thing. We had consultants come in last year to talk about the transfer process here, and they basically told us exactly that. They said, we have no idea how you make your transfer numbers every year because you do nothing for them. And we didn't. We're starting to, because you're right, it was a sort of it was a very much an underutilized group, because we've got the 2 largest community colleges in the state are right here, and so they came here because that's just what they do. Where else are they going to go? But yeah, to really be conscious of how that flow happens can be a great resource. We need to talk more about transfers on this show. Maybe we'll do a transfer show later in the spring.
Well, and also, if I can add, the important issue of not just do you recruit them and let them in, but do you have a coordinated articulation system so that it's truly 2 + 2. A lot of colleges that don't think about that don't provide good academic advising, they may let the student in, but hardly take any of the transfer credit. That is really unfair to the student, and means it's not 2 + 2, but 2 + 3 or 2 + 4. I'm also noticing some private colleges that historically haven't been as committed to community college transfer starting to pay more attention, because I think they're finding that particularly for many low-income first-generation students, the sticker price on 4 years of private college seems to them to just be, beyond what they could consider. But 2 years, maybe not. And so I think this is going to be an increasingly important issue.
Well, I think in addition, as you're seeing students, because just the whole thought of, I need to go to college right out of high school, even that, I think that whole paradigm is shifting where, it's, do you need to go to college? And it's very easy for me behind this desk to say, yes, of course you need to go to college. But there are plenty of stories. There are plenty of folks who go to community college and get a job and be successful, or who I had a student several years ago who was in our honors, one of our honors programs, was one of my advisees. Came in the middle of his freshman year as a mechanical engineering major and said, you know what, I like this. He said, but I want to work on cars. Like, that's what I want to do. That's where my passion lies. And I don't know that I need to spend the money to do this now if I just want to work on cars. And, it's a changing, the world outside of higher ed is changing so significantly, and the whole concept of taking a gap year or, whether it be just to work to build up money to be able to afford, college if you're paying for it on your own, all those kinds of things. I think we really need to be conscious of all of those kinds of things, especially for those of us who are so used to that very traditional, bring in 17, 18-year-olds and work them through over the course of their 4 years here. You talk about the veteran piece. The veteran piece is so very important. And again, a whole different set of challenges for students who are coming in with that background as well.
I was going to say, particularly this varies by geography, because if you're part of the country where the demographics aren't giving you increasing numbers of high school graduates, it's really important to be creative. Look, let's face it, there are a lot of colleges that have built their enrollment models over the years on how many people graduate from the high schools that typically come to us.
Right.
And there's still some places that are fortunate to be able to continue that. And in much of the country, there are too many graduating from a high school for them to have space. But in the many states with a shrinking traditional high school graduate population, you've got to be thinking about these new populations.
Very much. So let's see. So what else is on my list of questions here? In addition, to take a more serious bent, talking about affirmative action and racial concerns, racial tensions on college campuses were very, very prevalent this fall. University of Missouri, you can go on, there's the dozens of issues. How do we see that impacting what we do on the road, talking to parents and families? How do we encourage students of color, students who are traditionally underrepresented, that you've got a home here, and that we are welcoming communities, because everybody talks a great game, but there are obviously issues that run deeper in a lot of cases.
Right.
And again, this may be geographical in nature. Everything we talk about is going to vary depending on where you are in the world and where you are in the country. But how do you think that impacts what we do on the enrollment end?
So on the enrollment end, one thing is I think that minority students are increasingly cynical about the information that colleges send them. Let's face it, if you looked at college view books or college admissions web pages, you would think we were in race relations utopia of the world.
We're not?
Many of those brochures and web pages, one suggests a more diverse campus than in fact exists, and everyone seems happy as they are, walking in rainbow groups across campus. And I think if you look at those materials, they are the same at colleges that have really been shaken by minority students saying, we're not happy. We feel we're treated poorly all the time. And I think minority students are smart consumers, and they are knowing that they're being sold a bill of goods. I mean, periodically we end up writing about places where they Photoshop in minority students to largely white groups. That may be an extreme, but I think there is more scrutiny of the messages coming in, particularly at campuses that were in the press over issues. Now, the irony is I am not convinced that the University of Missouri or Yale are worse than many other campuses.
Totally
The
agree.
reality is some campuses got more attention, more press coverage,
Right.
but I think minority students are going to be looking at a few issues that are harder to make pretty just by a brochure. Critical mass. I think there are going to be a lot more questions about the numbers. How many are there? Because I think a lot of minority students are saying, we realize not everyone may be welcoming, but we want to know that we have a real community there. So I think there's going to be more of attention on critical mass, and more on people asking for numbers. Do minority students graduate? Frankly, if colleges that can say our minority graduation rate is as high or higher as our other rates, they're going to do well, because minority students are going to college because they want degrees. They want to advance themselves. Many are first generation. So I think you're going to see a lot more practical questions. Now, at places that have been in the news, I also expect there will be more questions about commitment, about whether administrators really get it. And again, going back to the Supreme Court case, I have been surprised in all the protests how little attention there was to this looming decision that could make campuses much less diverse. And I think if that happens, if the Supreme Court rules in a critical way about affirmative action, I think you're going to see a lot of scrutiny, and yet colleges may be really limited in what they can do. I have been wondering, a lot of colleges, to deal with protests in recent months, made a lot of promises. And, certainly if they promise to increase the budget of this program by X, a college can do that. Some of the promises I have wondered, will they really be able to do that? And are they just delaying the protest? The end of the fall semester was timed perfectly for college administrators, because protest movements have momentum, and students, though, do want to go home for break. And so there was this sort of natural break in a lot that's gone on. My question is going to be, in the next few weeks, what are we going to see?
Yeah. And I think, the question of the sort of the substance, having substance to your program ties into some of the other things that we've talked about, talking about, and not just giving lip service to the diversity piece. Well, you can't give lip service to, talking about transfer admissions. You talked about, making sure that the courses are available for these students and all those kinds of things. We can bring in all the students we want, but if we can't help get them what they need to be successful in their, whether it be academically, socially, culturally, whatever, the substance needs to be there. It can't just be the lip service of, we have a Black student union, so we're a diverse campus. You need to really have substance behind that to make it real for the students who are paying you the money and are expecting it to be real, and are expecting to be able to have that community, to be able to have that the cultural impact, the social impact, and the academic impact as well.
And I think the substance needs to be about every day, every week, every semester. I've been noticing in the last week or so, I've been getting, I think, more press releases about, we're doing this great Martin Luther King Day program. Now, it's great to do a good Martin Luther King Day program, but ultimately, I think minority students will be judging colleges by, are they made to feel welcome? Is it an inclusive environment? Are they graduating? Are they moving on with their lives? And the best Martin Luther King Day program isn't going to be as important as what is the total student experience like.
Yep, very, very, very much. And I think, that's something that I think we're going to, like you said, we'll see how that shakes out once students start to come back to campuses and things start to pop back up into life. I think it'll be interesting to see how that goes. So let's see. So what else is on my list here? So FAFSA made a big change this year in terms of releasing their data from an enrollment perspective. That was a big gear shift, but the FAFSA data that colleges and universities have gotten in terms of the FAFSA rankings and all those things will no longer be available to colleges, and sort of how they make their financial decisions. Do we think that will, I probably should have asked this back when we were talking about financial stuff, but do we think that will impact, or how do we think that'll impact? Probably not, it'll be more next year than this year, I suppose.
Well, I mean, we wrote a number of critical stories about that subject, with many people saying that colleges should be ashamed for using it as they were. I mean, call me old school, but I think colleges should be admitting students on the basis of how well they'll do at their college, and should be giving them aid based on what they need. And I think, again, colleges can't criticize students and parents for gaming the system. If
Right. Exactly.
And I guess what was most troublesome to many people about that use of the FAFSA data was that students didn't know.
Right.
And so students, might not have been putting the institutions in their, in fact, preference. And I think, generally, one of the ways that colleges can calm students is to be more honest about what matters and what doesn't matter.
Yeah, I think that transparency is important, and we've definitely talked about that. The transparency in the admissions process and how we make decisions and all that, and how what we do from a prospective student perspective, how that really impacts your educational experience at the school. I talked about the art student who wants to come here and do science. The student may have a 4.0 in an art program, but if they want to be a biology major here, they're going to need to have calculus and they're going to need to have physics, because that is an important piece of the undergraduate experience here. And to be realistic in, okay, good, students got a 4.0, they want to come here, great, let's get them in, may not be the best thing for that student. And so, we really need to be clear about what we're looking at when we make admissions decisions, when we make scholarship decisions, when we make honors program decisions, when we, really do the review that's the basis of our jobs, to make sure that we're really being clear to the folks on the other side of the desk. And the story I always tell, that back at my last job, I was going through a particularly frustrating point, and my wife told me, Chris, you forget, people leave your office and go out to dinner, because getting into college is a big deal. And it's easy to forget that when you're on this side of the desk, and how important that is and how life-changing that can be for students, for families. And you've got to make sure that playing field is level, and that the information goes all possible directions. I'm going to say two ways, but it goes all possible directions, so that we're very, very clear about how we do things.
Well, and in the absence of being clear, encourages sort of a lure that may lead students to do things that they don't need to do. Look at the students you mentioned, the applicants applying to 45 colleges.
Right, exactly.
Think about the number of students who are freaking out if they're a junior and they haven't already taken 5 AP courses. This would be another area where there's sort of this conventional wisdom out there that you must take X number of AP courses or you won't be treated seriously.
Yeah.
We had a great op-ed a few years ago by the Dean of Admissions at MIT, who talked about how he wished more students would follow their passions and not necessarily take no AP courses, but not necessarily try to take all AP courses. But the problem is, not many people like the MIT admissions dean will shout that and then will act upon it.
Right.
And so people assume, oh my gosh, if I don't have an SAT over X, I won't get in. Now, if in fact, and there are a lot of colleges that I think have informal cutoffs, if in fact colleges are unlikely to look at you with scores below X, by all means share that. But I think some places that claim they are truly holistic aren't quite so holistic. And some places that are honest about that don't share the information. I think a lot of unhealthy student behavior, high school student behavior, is encouraged by following the urban legend rather than real information.
Very much. I feel like every time we have an information session, where I've got 100 students and their families in our theater, the question comes up. It feels like every weekend the question comes up. Well, what sorts of extracurricular activities are you looking for? What do you want to see on an application? And well, that's not what it's about. It's not about what we want to see. It's about what you want to do. Don't do stuff just to do it. Don't do stuff to impress me. Do stuff because you're going to get something out of it, something tangible. That will impact your life in a real way beyond just, oh, I'm going to get into college. Make sure that your high school experience makes sense to you. It's not, I look back at all the APs that I took all those years ago that, did I need to take AP economics? Turns out I didn't in the grand scheme of things. And might I have found better use from doing that spending that period doing something else? Yeah, probably. But, it's hard to think that way when you're 14, 15, 16, 17, and us and the media and everything else has built the admissions process so big to what it is now.
I mean, I wonder what it would be like if colleges took more time to advertise things like not just our SAT level hit a record high, but we admitted 20% of our class with SATs below X. Right. Or, in the spirit of, or below a certain GPA. Now, that runs counter to the press releases that I see at admission season, but those sorts of things might speak to people and encourage them to consider those colleges and to think they'd be treated seriously in the admissions process.
All right, so we are coming up on time, so I want to give you a chance to, if there's anything else that you think that we should be watching for over the course of the next several months, anything you think is particularly important above and beyond anything that we've talked about, or your advice to higher ed folks in 2016.
Sure. Well, the other big issue that I think you mentioned earlier that we didn't really get to is the coalition.
Yes, that's right. I totally forgot about that. Hang on, don't end yet.
Okay,
yes, coalition.
So the coalition, it came out with big fanfare, and then there was an immediate backlash. And then the coalition said, we're hearing you on the backlash, and we're trying to involve everybody. So to me, a big question, and I don't know the answer yet, is how quickly does the coalition move, and does it take off? Now, the coalition members are all places that will continue to accept applications through the Common Application. So nobody's being forced to switch, but I and others will be interested as it launches. Do students create portfolios? Do they do it not just at elite high schools, but at high schools that don't have a lot of resources?
Yeah, that's the trick, yep.
Do students start to feel, wow, this is a good way of representing myself and what I'm about? Or do they view it as a big confusing mess and want to just stick with a Common App? That will be a big question. And I guess what I sense in my talking to people, there are some who really wanted an alternative to the Common App because there's still a lot of lingering frustrations over the technical problems of a few years ago. And at that time, many colleges said we shouldn't let the Common App have a monopoly. So some are excited about the alternative. Some are excited about the vision behind the coalition of a new way of presenting themselves. And so you've got multiple motives going on here. And so that, to me, will be one of the big issues to watch this year. And I guess generally to higher ed, while the affirmative action case isn't labeled college admissions, it, of course, is college admissions.
Right.
The coalition was basically saying the way many students apply was flawed. And so I would say college admissions will continue to receive a lot of scrutiny from the press, from the politicians, and others. I would invite those who are doing new and interesting things to reach out to me. Always like to hear good ideas, and your ideas are welcome at any time. So I really appreciate today's opportunity and look forward to future discussions.
Awesome. Well, thank you to Scott Jaschik for joining us, and thank you to everybody who joined us on the back end. Of course, this will be available if you want to check it out later on at higheredlive.com, as well as, of course, on iTunes. So if you want to listen to it on your way to work, you can listen to it on your way to work. And you can always tweet me here or Scott at Scott Jaschik or Inside Higher Ed. It's mandatory reading. If you are not checking Inside Higher Ed regularly, then you are in the wrong field, because there's such great information there, so I can't thank Scott enough for helping us out as we kick off 2016 on Admissions Live. Next month, we are doing something special again. We are partnering with NACAC, and so February 7th, Monday, February 7th, no, not February 1st, well, whatever, it's February, whenever the first Monday in February is. I will be interviewing author and college counselor Josh Steckel about his new book, Hold Fast to Dreams. And so once you have spoken with Josh live on the internet, then NACAC will host a hashtag NACAC Reads. And so there will be a Twitter chat through NACAC that will follow. So this is a great opportunity to build discussion. And so the book, Hold Fast to Dreams, follows 10 students through this college process, and so all the things that they're doing. And so it's a fantastic read, and so it'll be really interesting to see some more insight into these students and into the process of how they went through their college search. So that next month on Admissions Live. Thanks as always to our program sponsors, Chegg and M. Stoner, and thanks of course to Scott from Higher Ed Live. Thanks for watching, everybody. We'll see you next week. We're talking social monitoring on my co-host Nicole Lentini next Monday, 1 o'clock Eastern, same bat time, same bat channel. And we'll see you all next time on Higher Ed Live.